Pozvu posledního dnešního speakera, Chris Taggart, výkonný ředitel OpenCorporates Velká Británie, aby uzavřel tuto dnešní sérii.
Whoops. You don't need that. Leave it. It doesn't matter. Okay. I will try also to run under. In fact, I will have my stopwatch on to see how much under I can run. So, some of this I will go through fairly quickly because I touched on it a little bit at the last panel. OpenCorporates, largest open database of companies in the world. People think of companies in a slightly odd way. That when companies were formed a long time ago, it's very different from how they are now. The world that we live in, is very different from how it was 10, 20 years ago. It's a massively interconnected world, just massively interconnected. And it's also massively corporate as well. Companies form part of all of our lives in every single minute of our life as well. From security guards here to the people providing the equipment to all sorts of things. Every part of it, everything that we do is about companies. But companies are very different from how they were. We used to think of companies as bricks and mortar, as a physical place. It's not been that for some time. It's not even like the idea of a big multinational company with a huge office block. It's much more this sort of stuff. Thousands of companies making up a single entity, a single group. However, you wouldn't realize that from looking at the official data. When you actually try to get information about companies, statutory information. So companies are artificial creations, artificial constructs, an idea, if you like, given legal personality, given the ability to, something which you can't see, you can't handcuff, you can't put in jail, is given the ability to sign contracts as if it were a person, given the ability to own assets, given the ability to employ people. Yet, and this is why it's statutory. This is why we have these registers in the first place. But you wouldn't think that we lived in the modern 20th century. This is the sort of stuff that most registers are full of. Scans of paper documents filled in by hand. This is actually a very, even for the largest companies, billion-dollar companies, they're filled in by hand. Much of this is there. It is data, but doesn't exist as data. This is actually from, I think this is actually from the Tesco's, the second biggest retailer in the world, and this is how they file their subsidiaries on the UK Companies House. And as you can see, it's on its side. It's very low quality. It doesn't respond to OCRing at all to do it. And this is what we have. There are also significant gaps in the data. It's very variable, but even within individual registers, there are significant gaps. Shareholding information is particularly problematic. Typically, there are restrictive licenses. And more than that, not just in terms of what is the license and what can you do with it, but actually access is restricted fundamentally to those who pay. This is what we think company registers should be in the modern world. They should be wholly digital, because it is all digital stuff. They should be accurate. They should be true. They should be up to date. To have information that is 18 months old, sometimes, or even 3 years old, depending on what the filing requirements are. That's just no good in the world that we live in today. You can't make business decisions on that sort of stuff, and they should, of course, be entirely open. So we've been working with the World Bank, in partnership with the World Bank. We have an open company corporate data index, where we measure just how accurate, whether it's a company registers conform to that. The UK, I'm quite proud to say, does pretty well. And the Czech Republic doesn't do badly, but there are some big problems with the Czech data. But many other places just do terribly. So in somewhere like Spain, for example, you can't even search to see if a company exists in Spain without paying money. Now, I used to be a journalist in a former life, and, you know, the fact that not only do you have to register, you know, type in your information, put your credit card, or each time you want to see if a company exists, that's a pretty big barrier to investigating a company. Now, I'm not saying it's directly correlated to corruption, but I don't believe it helps a lot either. So, OpenCorporates, what are we doing about this? We have a fairly simple goal, but it's an ambitious one. In fact, it's a huge one. We want an openly licensed database for every single company, every single legal entity in the world. We've grown in 3 years from 3 million companies to over 62 million now. There's a good chance we'll hit 100 million this year with some of the things we're going to be doing. We're putting in information about directors, so you can search across for directors, not just search for companies across different jurisdictions, but search for directors. Again, you know, and there have already been some quite interesting things that have been found from this, and it means that even when I was in Kenya about a year ago, the journalist there has quite a lot of found it very interesting to be able to search for politically powerful Kenyans in the in OpenCorporates and finding them in the UK company register, for example. It's all available as data, and critically, it's available as data with provenance. That circular thing you can't see, but that's where we got the information from and when we got it. And we're actually even going further about how we got it in the future as well. So this is, sorry, the slide went out of order there, but this is the sort of stuff that we can start to do. We're starting to put in corporate network data. This is actually a New Zealand public corporation. This actual one is Goldman Sachs. No, sorry, this one is, it's not Goldman Sachs. I think this might be Citibank. I can't actually read from here, beg your pardon. So one of the things we do is we take basically data that's a mess. And this is one of the things that many of the people in the open, businesses around open data do. We take data that's a mess, and we try to do something useful with it. Now, one of the things that this data set actually comes from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve maintain a database of bank hierarchies, that is, bank networks, that is, banks that are owned by other banks and what they own and so on. It's in a terrible state in that the website is one of the most confusing websites that there is to do. And then when you say, okay, show me the information about Goldman Sachs, for example. Show me what all of its subsidiaries are. So what it does is say, oh, helpfully, because it's got more than 250, we're going to give you this as a PDF. We won't even show it on a web page. On a web page, for those who've done any sort of extracting data from web pages, makes it's not easy, but it's not too difficult either. Taking information from PDFs, much more. Taking information from auto-generated 999-page PDFs, now that's actually quite tricky. So what we did, but nevertheless, we wrote the code to do that, and we wrote the code not to do that just for Goldman Sachs, but for every single company in that database. And now what we've just done, and we're starting to work with some academics in the UK, we've actually gone back in time of this. So we've got the corporate networks for the banks, for the big banks in the US over the last 12 years, and see how those networks have changed. Now, and we're also making that available for all academics or other open data projects as open data. This is just this is actually the UK's, and as I said, I'm pretty proud of the UK. They've genuinely done, it's very difficult for private sector people to praise government, but you know what? They've done good stuff. People there, people like Andrew Stott, Richard Sterling, when they were in the government, they took personal and professional risks to make this stuff happen, and that's what's required. People at Companies House, they now have, I had a meeting with people at Companies House who we know quite well, and the chief executive was giving a presentation yesterday, which I attended, and he said, it's really simple. We basically sat down and we understood that the purpose of the register was for people to use it. There is no point in having a register if nobody is using it. So therefore, our metric should be how many people are using it. So now we say, how can we get more people to be using our data? How can we get more people to do it? Now, that basic company data that they do, which is produced once a month, you can also get data via the API, which is what we do. That basic company data, which is produced once a month, has been downloaded 20,000 times. What's even more interesting is that the one on the left is the accounts data. So companies in the UK, many of them now file as their accounts as data. That has now been downloaded 12,000 times since November, that data set. Now that's a hell of a lot of people reusing company accounts data. That's the sort of stuff it's enabled, and they're working hard to ensure that, and unfortunately, there are some EU regulations which make it difficult for them to open up some of the data, but they're working hard and they are determined to have every single part of the company register open as open data ultimately. And this is the reason why, this is actually the Chancellor of the Exchequer way back in the 1850s in the UK. It's not, it's about good business. He said it's essential to give the greatest publicity to the affairs of companies. This was when companies were being formed en masse in the first time, so that everyone may know on what grounds he is dealing. Whether you're working for a company, whether you're buying from it, whether you're selling it, whether you're regulating it, you need to know about that company. That's why we have these registers in the first place. It's also about corruption. The World Bank Stolen Asset Recovery Team did an investigation. Out of the 150 large-scale corruption cases they looked at, most, and by some margin, used companies as conduits for it. Looking at the stuff in the Ukraine, all that stuff, it's going through companies. Money laundering, going through companies. HSBC, huge money laundering problems there, going through companies. This is the problem. When you have this opacity, you create a perfect environment for bad stuff to happen. Finally, I just want to give you a little example. This is something that we've been using. I think the PDF's not come out great, but this is something that we've been doing to build crowdsourcing into OpenCorporates. And we looked at Facebook. Now, the point about Facebook is that Facebook thinks what's important about you is not necessarily your date of birth or your social security number. It's all your connections. So we looked at Facebook. Now, Facebook is a really big company. But you know what? This is from their SEC filing, which is text, by the way. And they just list 6 companies as subsidiaries, most of which don't have Facebook in the name. So we actually looked at a couple of those. A couple of them, they're based in Ireland, and looked at where we could, what we could actually find out about the nature of the relationship with Facebook Inc. And this is what we found. Those 2 companies are at the bottom. And actually, they go through a web, essentially, of different companies, including Cayman Islands companies that have got 1 share, in 999 shares and 1 share, going up through there. That's the reality of what companies are like today. It's not big company owning a few subsidiaries. That's the nature. That's got implications to do with tax. That's got implications to do with contracts and corruption and procurement. That's got implications to do with lobbying. This has got implications to do with actually competition. if the big companies can have corporate networks that their newer, more innovative competitors, can't understand, then we don't have proper competition. Thank you.